I'm going to say this slowly because even now it doesn't feel real. An HOA president put a lien on my family ranch, sold it for $25,000, and nearly erased 3 generations of history, even though I was never an HOA member. And the worst part? For a while, she almost got away with it. Now, before I tell you how this happened, I need you to picture something. Imagine waking up one morning, stepping outside your home, breathing in air that smells like land your grandfather worked with his hands, and realizing someone else has legally claimed it. No warning, no court date, no chance to defend yourself. Just a piece of paper telling you your life is no longer yours. If that sounds unreal, comment right now and tell me honestly. Backhand index pointing right, do you think something like this should even be possible? Because I didn't either. This ranch wasn't just property. It was 120 acres of open land, fencing older than me, a farmhouse built in the 1950s, and a windmill my dad fixed every summer. My grandfather bought it after coming back from the war. He raised cattle here. My father raised me here. No HOA, no community board, no rules about paint color or grass height, just land and freedom. That freedom is what made Karen notice us. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I first saw her. I was fixing a broken fence post when a spotless white SUV rolled up the dirt road like it didn't belong there. No dust, no scratches, no hesitation. The door opened and out stepped a woman holding a clipboard like it was a badge. She didn't wave, didn't smile. She just walked toward me and said, "Are you the property owner?" I nodded. She glanced around with visible disgust and said, "This property is in violation of HOA standards." I laughed, not because I was being rude, but because it sounded like a joke. "There's no HOA out here," I said. She smiled, not a friendly smile, the kind that says you're about to learn something the hard way. "Oh," she replied, "there is now." That was my first warning sign. I should have told her to leave. I should have called a lawyer that same day. Instead, I asked, "Who are you?" She flipped her clipboard and said, "I'm Karen, president of the Silver Creek Community Association." I told her, "We're not part of Silver Creek." She tapped her pen against the paper and said calmly, "You're adjacent." I said, "That doesn't mean anything." She replied, "It will." Within 2 weeks, letters started arriving. First one said my fencing was non-compliant. Second said my barn was unapproved. Third said livestock density violated HOA standards. Each letter came with a fine. $500, $1,200, $3,000. Every letter ended the same way. "Failure to comply will result in legal action." I called the number once. Karen answered immediately. I said, "You can't find me. I don't belong to your HOA." She said, "You benefit from the community." I said, "We don't use your roads, your pool, your services." She paused, then said something that stuck with me. "Property values are shared responsibility." That's when I realized this wasn't confusion. This was intentional. I ignored the letters. That's what most people would do, right? If you received HOA fines from a neighborhood you don't belong to, wouldn't you assume it's nonsense? Backhand index pointing right, comment below if you would have ignored them too, because that's exactly what I did. 3 months later, I came home to find a bright orange notice nailed to my porch. Notice of Lien. At first, I thought it was a prank. Then I read the amount. $87,450. My hands started shaking. The document claimed unpaid HOA dues, penalties, and administrative enforcement costs. I called Karen immediately. She answered on the second ring. I yelled, "You filed a lien on my ranch." She said calmly, "You were warned." I said, "You have no authority here." She replied, "Tell that to the county." Then she hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment she said, "There is now." I hired a lawyer the next day. He told me something that made my stomach drop. "The lien is real," he said. "It was accepted by the clerk." I asked, "How is that possible?" He sighed, "Because no one challenged it yet." Before we could file the paperwork, Karen made her move, and what she did next was so extreme, so calculated, and so illegal that when I found out, I thought my life was over. If you think HOA abuse can't go this far, stay with me. Because in the next chapter, I come home to find strangers walking my land and a real estate sign standing where my family gate used to be. Backhand index pointing right before you go on, comment one word, fight or move on. Because I had to make that choice next, and it changed everything. I chose fight, not because I was brave, not because I felt strong, but because when I pulled into my driveway that afternoon, I realized there might not be anything left to move on to. As my truck rolled up the dirt road, something felt wrong immediately. The gate was open. I never leave that gate open. Then I saw it. A bright red and white real estate sign planted right in the middle of my land, swaying gently in the wind like it owned the place. My heart started pounding. I slammed the brakes, jumped out, and read the words I still see in my nightmares. "Auction property sold." I laughed. A sharp, panicked laugh that came from disbelief, not humor. Sold? Sold to who? I started walking, then stopped dead in my tracks. There were people on my ranch, strangers, a man in a suit taking photos, a woman pointing toward my barn, another guy pacing off measurements like he was already planning renovations. That's when I realized this wasn't a threat anymore. This was happening. I marched straight up to the man in the suit. "What the hell are you doing on my property?" I demanded. He looked surprised, then annoyed. "I'm the listing agent," he said. "This property was sold this morning." I said, "You're mistaken, I live here." He frowned, then pulled out a folder. "County auction," he replied. "Lien foreclosure finalized at 9:14 a.m. He turned the paperwork around. My name wasn't on it. Coren's HOA was. Sold price, $25,000. I felt like the ground disappeared beneath me. This land, worth over $1 million, sold for the price of a used car. If this doesn't make your blood boil, comment right now because I need to know. Backhand index pointing right. How is this even legal? I called my lawyer. He didn't answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. Meanwhile, the agent kept talking. "New owners are excited," he said. "Development potential is huge," I snapped. "You are trespassing," he shrugged. "Take it up with the HOA. That name again, HOA, like a curse. I drove straight to the Silver Creek HOA office. I didn't knock. I didn't wait. I walked in, heart racing, fists clenched. Corinne was sitting behind her desk, calm as ever, sipping from a stainless steel tumbler. She looked up and smiled. "Oh," she said, "you saw the sign." I slammed the auction papers onto her desk. "You sold my ranch," she glanced down casually. "Yes," just like that, no hesitation, no shame. I yelled, "You stole it." She leaned back in her chair. "You failed to pay your fines," I said. "I don't belong to your HOA." She tilted her head and said something that chilled me. "You didn't opt out." I said, "That's not how property law works." She replied softly, "It worked. Take a second. If you were standing there, hearing someone admit they sold your home, backhand index pointing right, what would you do?" Comment it, because I almost lost control. I threatened police. She laughed. I threatened lawsuits. She smiled wider. Then she said the one sentence that made everything clear. "You should have read the bylaws." I said, "I never signed anything." She tapped the desk. "Doesn't matter now." I left shaking, but I wasn't done. This time I went straight to the police station. At first, they treated me like I was confused. "Sounds like a civil dispute," the officer said. I slammed the paperwork on the counter. "They sold land I live on." That got attention. Another officer joined, then a supervisor. They made calls. They frowned. Then one of them said quietly, "This doesn't look right." That night, my lawyer finally called me back. His voice was different, low, serious. "They moved fast," he said, "too fast." I told him about the sale price. He went silent. Then he said, "Who bought it?" I said, "Some investment group." He paused. "Give me the name." I did. He exhaled slowly. "That company doesn't exist." Turns out the buyer was a shell company, registered 3 weeks earlier. No employees, no history, owned by, guess who? Coren's brother-in-law. If your jaw just dropped, comment "wow," because mine did too. This wasn't overreach. This wasn't HOA abuse. This was planned theft. By the next morning, police were involved. The county froze the transfer. Corinne was notified. She didn't panic. She doubled down. She filed more paperwork, threatened eviction, sent me a letter saying I had 72 hours to vacate. That's when fear turned into rage. I stood on my porch that night, looking over the land my grandfather fought for, and I made a promise. She wasn't taking this from me. Not quietly, not legally, not at all. And as my lawyer prepared the emergency court filing, Corinne made one final mistake. A mistake so arrogant that it handed us everything. Because the email she sent next, the one she never thought anyone would read, became the evidence that destroyed her. Backhand index pointing right before the next chapter. Comment this. Expose her. Because that's exactly what happens next. The email came in at 11:47 p.m. I remember the time because I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at paperwork I barely understood, wondering how someone could steal land without ever setting foot on it. My lawyer forwarded it to me with one line: "She messed up." The subject line read, "Enforcement Strategy Confidential." It was from Corinne to the HOA board and somehow accidentally CC'd to the county clerk. I opened it. My hands started shaking. She didn't talk like someone confused about boundaries. She talked like someone executing a plan. Corinne wrote, "Once the Lien foreclosure finalizes, the ranch will be transferred to Silver Creek Holdings. After resale, HOA funds will be stabilized and dissenters will learn compliance is not optional." Dissenters, that's what she called me. Then came the line that made my lawyer sit up straight. "Jurisdiction concerns are irrelevant once liquidation is complete." Irrelevant. That was the moment this stopped being an HOA dispute. This was criminal intent. If you're still watching, pause for a second and comment this. Backhand index pointing right. How did she think this would end? Because I still don't know. By morning, everything moved fast, too fast for Corinne to control anymore. The county issued an emergency injunction. The police opened a formal investigation, and the auction transfer was officially frozen. Corinne showed up at the ranch anyway. She Arrived with two men in polo shirts and a woman holding eviction paperwork. I stood on my porch. She didn't yell. She didn't threat. She smiled and said, "You should have taken the settlement." I said, "You committed fraud." She replied calmly, "Prove it." That confidence, that arrogance, it was about to crumble. The officers arrived 15 minutes later. Karen tried to take charge immediately. "I'm the HOA president," she announced. "This is private enforcement." The officer asked, "Do you own this land?" She hesitated. "Well, not personally." That was all it took. The officer turned to me and said, "Sir, don't leave the property." Karen's smile vanished. They asked for documents. She handed over copies. The officer compared them to county records. Then he frowned. "These signatures don't match." Karen stiffened. The officer looked at her and said, "Ma'am, did you file these?" She crossed her arms. "Yes." That's when the word forgery entered the conversation. If that made your stomach drop, comment, "This is insane," because that's exactly how it felt standing there. Karen was told to leave. She didn't. She argued. She raised her voice. And when the officer finally said, "Ma'am, step away from the property," she snapped. "You can't talk to me like that. I run this community." The officer replied, "Not this one." 2 days later, we were in court, emergency hearing. Karen walked in confident, heels clicking, folder tucked under her arm like she still had control. The judge didn't look impressed. My lawyer laid out the timeline, the letters, the fines, the lien, the auction, the shell company, then the email. The judge stopped him mid-sentence. "You're telling me," the judge said slowly, "that an HOA sold land it had no jurisdiction over to a company connected to its president?" Karen's lawyer jumped up. "Objection," the judge raised a hand. "Sit down." The room went quiet. Karen didn't look at me anymore. She stared straight ahead. The judge ordered a full forensic review of the HOA's filings, every lien, every foreclosure, every enforcement action, and that's when the dominoes started falling, because mine wasn't the only property. If you think this ends here, comment "No way," because what they found next turned this into a nightmare for Karen. 3 more families came forward within a week. Different properties, different excuses. Same HOA, same signatures, same handwriting. Karen didn't just target me, she practiced on others first. Smaller lots, elderly owners, people who didn't fight back. One woman lost her home after missing a single payment she never owed. Another man had his land seized while he was hospitalized. If this makes you angry, comment "justice," because the anger was spreading fast. The district attorney stepped in. Federal investigators followed. Karen's world began to shrink. HOA board resigned one by one. Silver Creek's office closed overnight. And suddenly the woman who once said "there is now" had nowhere left to stand. The final hearing was packed. Media everywhere. Karen sat at the defense table, no clipboard this time, no confidence either. My lawyer played the email on the big screen, then the forged signatures, then the shell company ownership chain. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Karen," he said, "did you believe the law didn't apply to you?" She finally spoke. "I was protecting property values." The judge replied coldly, "You were stealing homes." That's when the officer stood up. "Your Honor, we are placing the defendant under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and abuse of authority." Karen screamed. This time, no one listened. The handcuffs clicked. The room exhaled. If you felt that moment, comment "cuffed" right now. The sale was voided. My ranch was returned. Every lien Karen filed was reversed. Victims were compensated. The HOA was dissolved. But as I walked back onto my land, something felt different. Not relief. Resolve. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about stopping people who think power gives them permission. Once the investigation went public, everything changed. What started as my nightmare became everyone's problem. The county released a notice asking anyone affected by Silver Creek HOA enforcement to come forward. At first, I thought maybe 1 or 2 people would respond. By the end of the week, there were dozens, emails, phone calls, handwritten letters, different stories, same pattern. Karen didn't just wake up one day and decide to take my ranch. She practiced. She tested the system. She learned how far she could push before anyone pushed back, and most people didn't. I met an elderly man named Robert in the courthouse hallway. He shook my hand with both of his. "They took my cabin," he said quietly. Said I owed fees. I didn't even know what an HOA was. Another woman, Maria, broke down crying as she spoke. "I was in the hospital," she said. "They sold my house while I was recovering from surgery." Same signatures, same shell buyers, same fast auctions. Karen's handwriting was everywhere. If you're watching this and feeling sick to your stomach, comment "This is evil," because that's exactly how it felt hearing them. The district attorney upgraded the charges. What was once possible fraud became organized real estate theft. Federal investigators stepped in because the shell companies crossed state lines. And suddenly, Karen wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting the system she thought she controlled. She tried damage control. She sent emails claiming administrative misunderstandings. She blamed former board members. She even tried to resign. Too late. Her resignation letter was entered into evidence. The judge called it what it was, an attempt to flee responsibility. The HOA board collapsed in real time. One by one, members quit. Some claimed ignorance. Others lawyered up immediately. Silver Creek's office shut its doors without warning. The sign came down overnight. No announcement, no apology, just silence. That silence was louder than anything Karen ever said. At the next hearing, the courtroom was standing room only. News cameras lined the walls. Karen walked in wearing gray this time. No clipboard, no confidence. She didn't look at anyone, not even me. The judge opened with one sentence: "This court will determine how many lives were damaged by unchecked authority." If that line gave you chills, comment power abuse, because that's what this was always about. Evidence came fast: emails, financial records, internal HOA messages discussing liquidation targets. One message stood out. Karen wrote, "Once people realize resistance is pointless, compliance will follow." The judge paused, then said, "Compliance through fear is not governance, it's extortion." Karen flinched. That afternoon, the court ordered all HOA-enforced property sales frozen statewide pending review. That meant hundreds of families got a second chance. And that meant Karen's actions had consequences far beyond my ranch. As I walked out of the courthouse, a reporter asked me, "Do you feel vindicated?" I said, "I feel responsible. Because if I hadn't fought, none of this would have surfaced." That night, I stood on my land again. Same stars, same wind. But I knew something now: people like Karen don't stop unless they're forced to, and she still hadn't faced the final reckoning, because criminal court was next. Backhand index pointing right, comment this if you're still with me. Don't let her walk. Criminal court is different. No speeches about community values, no loopholes, no HOA language games, just facts and consequences. Karen sat at the defense table between two attorneys who no longer looked confident. The charges were read out loud: fraud, forgery, conspiracy, abuse of authority, financial exploitation. Each word hit harder than the last. Karen stared straight ahead. She didn't argue anymore. The prosecution walked the jury through the system Karen built. How she targeted non-HOA properties first. How she inflated fines. How she rushed auctions before owners could respond. And then came the number that changed the room. Total property value seized or attempted to be seized, over $12 million. If your mouth just dropped, comment 12 million, because nobody expected it to be that high. Then they called me. I stood at the witness stand and told the story you're hearing now. The fence, the letters, the lien, the sign on my land. I looked at the jury and said, "She didn't just steal land, she tried to erase us." Karen didn't look up. Her defense tried one last move. They argued she misunderstood jurisdiction, that she believed she was acting legally. The prosecutor responded by pulling up the email, the one where Karen wrote, "Jurisdiction concerns are irrelevant once liquidation is complete." The courtroom went silent. The judge didn't even need to comment. Karen had convicted herself. When the verdict came back, it didn't take long. Guilty, on every count. Karen collapsed into her chair. No screaming this time. No anger, just the sound of someone realizing power has limits. She was sentenced to prison. Assets seized, properties returned. HOA authority permanently revoked. Silver Creek ceased to exist, and new laws were proposed to restrict HOA foreclosure powers statewide. One person fought back, and it changed everything. I still live on that ranch. I still fix the fences. But now every time I see someone challenge unfair authority, I remember this. Silence is what people like Karen count on. So I'll ask you one last time. Backhand index pointing right, would you have fought like I did? Backhand index pointing right, or would fear have stopped you? Tell me in the comments. The verdict didn't end the damage. It only confirmed it. Because while Karen was led away in handcuffs, I learned something that night that hit harder than anything she did before. The ranch was legally mine again, but financially I was bleeding. Legal fees, missed work, frozen accounts during the investigation. And the worst part, Karen knew that would happen. She counted on it. She once wrote in an internal HOA message, "Even if they win, they won't recover." That sentence sat in my head like poison. If you've ever felt like justice still comes at a cost, comment "paid the price," because that's exactly what this felt like. While Karen waited for sentencing, the civil lawsuits began. Victims came forward in waves. Some lost homes, some lost savings, some lost years of peace. One family lived out of an RV for 6 months after their house was auctioned while they were overseas. Another man died before his property could be returned. That one still haunts me. The judge ordered restitution, millions. Karen's lawyers argued she couldn't pay. The judge replied, "Then she shouldn't have stolen." Assets were seized. Bank accounts frozen. Homes sold, including Karen's own. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. If you believe karma showed up right on time, comment "full circle." Then something unexpected happened. I received a letter, handwritten, from Karen. I didn't want to open it, but I did. It said, "I never thought anyone would push back this hard." That was it. No apology, no remorse, just surprise. That told me everything. Media attention faded. New scandals replaced this one. But something permanent changed. Counties began auditing HOAs. States proposed new oversight laws. Lien filings were double verified. Karen didn't just lose. Her actions exposed a system that allowed people like her to thrive. One afternoon, I stood on my ranch with my lawyer. He looked out over the land and said, "You realize this could have happened to anyone?" I nodded. "That's why I'm telling this." Because if you think it can't happen to you, comment "it can," because it absolutely can. The night before Karen's sentencing, something strange happened. I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it. I'm glad I didn't, because that call revealed one last truth Karen hoped would never surface, and it changed the sentence she received. Part 6, the voice on the phone was shaking. "This isn't on the record," the man said, "but you need to know." He used to work for Silver Creek. Former HOA accountant. He told me Karen didn't act alone, she just acted loudest. He explained how funds were moved, how shell companies were created early, how certain county filings were fast-tracked. And then he said something that made my stomach drop. "She planned your property years ago," years before she ever met me, before the first letter. She saw the ranch as the key: large land, low resistance, high resale value. If that chills you, comment "premeditated," because that's exactly what it was. My lawyer contacted the prosecutor immediately. The call was recorded, the accountant testified, new evidence was entered, emails showed Karen discussing long-term acquisition targets. My ranch was highlighted. At sentencing, the judge looked at Karen differently. "You didn't make a mistake," he said. "You built a machine." Karen finally spoke. Her voice cracked. "I thought no one would notice." The judge replied, "That's why you're dangerous." The sentence doubled. Federal time, no early release, no quiet exit. When the gavel came down, Karen closed her eyes. For the first time, she looked small, not powerful, not feared, just accountable. If you believe that moment mattered, comment "accountability." As she was taken away, she looked at me, not with anger, with disbelief, like she still couldn't understand why I didn't just give up. I went home that night and stood on my land again. The wind moved through the grass the same way it always had. But now I understood something deeply. People like Karen exist everywhere. They rely on silence, on fear, on exhaustion, and the moment you fight back, they fall apart. So here's what I want you to do. Backhand index pointing right, check your HOA documents. Backhand index pointing right, question authority that doesn't make sense. Backhand index pointing right, speak up when something feels wrong. And most importantly, backhand index pointing right, comment below, would you have fought this or would you have walked away? Because your answer might matter someday. I thought everything was over after sentencing. I was wrong, because justice doesn't always end with a gavel. Sometimes it lingers. A month after Karen was sent away, I received another call, this time from the county. They asked if I could come in to clarify a few things. That phrase never means a few things. When I arrived, the room was full. County officials, investigators, two people I'd never seen before. One of them slid a folder toward me. Inside were maps, red outlines, dozens of properties, all marked the same way mine had been. The investigator said quietly, "These are the ones we haven't told the owners about yet." That's when it hit me. Karen's damage was still unfolding. If that makes your chest tight, and comment "still going," because I felt sick. Some of the properties were owned by people who had already moved away. Some belonged to estates. Some owners had no idea liens were even filed. Karen didn't just steal land, she planted landmines. The county asked me something I didn't expect. They wanted me to speak publicly, to testify at hearings, to tell my story again and again. At first, I hesitated. I was tired. I wanted my life back. But then I remembered Robert, Maria, the man who never lived to see his home returned. So I said yes. The first hearing was brutal. HOA lobbyists filled the room, suits, smiles, carefully chosen words. They argued oversight would harm community harmony. I stood up and said, "Harmony built on fear isn't harmony, it's silence." The room went quiet. If you agree with that statement, comment "say it louder." From that moment on, things shifted. States began drafting new rules. Lien notices required certified proof. HOA boundaries had to be re-verified yearly. Emergency foreclosures were restricted. Karen's case became a reference point. A warning, but not everyone liked that. I started getting emails, anonymous ones. "Why couldn't you just move? You ruined things for everyone. You made enemies." One message said, "You should be careful on that ranch." That one scared me, I won't lie. If you've ever been threatened for standing up, comment "I feel this." The sheriff increased patrols, neighbors checked in, and something unexpected happened. People I didn't know started stopping by, families, older couples. They just wanted to say thank you. One man shook my hand and said, "Because of you, my lien was reversed." That made every sleepless night worth it. One evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, I walked the fence line with my dad. He hadn't said much through all this. Then he stopped and said, "You did what your grandfather would have done." That broke me, because that land wasn't just dirt, it was identity. And Karen tried to erase it, but the story still wasn't finished. Because the HOA world didn't learn quietly. They pushed back, hard, and the final battle wasn't in court, it was in public opinion, and it nearly turned everything upside down. Backhand index pointing right comment, stay strong if you're still with me, because the pressure ramps up next. I thought the worst was behind me, I was wrong again. Because when a system gets exposed, it doesn't quietly accept defeat. It fights back. Harder, the first sign came in the mail, not a bill, not a notice. A cease and desist letter sent by a statewide HOA alliance. They accused me of defamation, misrepresentation, and damaging community trust. I laughed at first. Then I read the last line, failure to retract public statements may result in legal action. They weren't protecting communities, they were protecting themselves. If you've ever seen powerful groups close ranks, comment cover up because that's exactly what this felt like. I showed the letter to my lawyer, he shook his head. They're scared, he said, and scared organizations make noise. He was right. Within days, online posts appeared questioning my credibility, anonymous comments, fake accounts, claims that I exaggerated, that Karen was a lone wolf, that the ranch was abandoned anyway. That one hurt, because my family bled for that land. Then came the meetings, town halls, public hearings, rooms packed with residents, HOA board members, lawyers, and reporters. I stood up in one meeting and said, I didn't ask for this fight, but once it started, I refused to lose quietly. Some people applauded. Others stared at me like I'd committed a crime. If you've ever been brave and still felt alone, comment, I know this feeling. One HOA president stood up and pointed at me. You're destroying property values, he said. I replied, no, I exposed theft. The room erupted. That's when I realized something important. People weren't afraid of losing HOAs. They were afraid of losing control. The pressure followed me home. Cars slowed near my gate. Unknown trucks parked on the road for too long. One night I found fresh tire tracks near the barn. Nothing was stolen, nothing broken, just a message. I didn't sleep much after that. If that unsettles you, comment intimidation, because that's what it was. Sheriff took it seriously, so did the media. And that attention turned the tables. What was meant to scare me became evidence. Reports were filed, patterns documented, and suddenly HOA intimidation tactics were part of the investigation, not just Karen, the entire culture. Then the journalist called again. Her voice was sharp. They're panicking, she said, and I found something. She uncovered internal communications between HOA associations, not illegal on their own, but revealing. They talked about containment, messaging alignment, and discouraging dissenters. Dissenters, the same word Karen used. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about one woman. It was about what happens when unchecked authority believes it's untouchable. If that realization just clicked for you, comment systemic. The follow-up article landed like a bomb. It didn't just focus on Karen, it exposed the network, the incentives, the loopholes, the lack of oversight. And overnight, the narrative flipped. HOAs went from community protectors to potential predators. Legislators responded. Emergency sessions were called, testimonies scheduled, and once again they asked me to speak. This time nationally, I stood behind a podium and said, I didn't lose my ranch because of a mistake. I almost lost it because too many people looked away. The room was silent. If you believe silence enables abuse, comment, say it. That speech did something I didn't expect. It gave people permission. Victims who stayed quiet for years finally spoke, not just about land, about fines, threats, harassment, retaliation. Karen wasn't the exception, she was the example. Late one night after another long day, I walked outside and looked across the ranch. The same land Karen thought she could take. I realized something powerful. She failed because she underestimated one thing, persistence, not strength, not money, not power. Just refusal to disappear. And yet, the story still wasn't over, because when everything else fails, people like Karen always try one last move. And the message she sent from prison, yes, from prison, proved she still didn't understand what she'd done. Backhand index pointing right before the final chapter, comment this. SHE still get it. The letter arrived on a gray morning. No return address. Just my name written carefully like the person on the other end wanted control over even that. I already knew who it was from. Karen, prison stationery. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Because some people don't write to apologize, they write to justify. The letter was 2 pages long, neat handwriting, carefully chosen words. She didn't say she was sorry, not once. Instead, she wrote, I hope one day you understand that what I did was for the greater good. That line made my hands shake. The greater good, that's how she still saw it. Power disguised as purpose. If that chills you, comment no remorse, because that's exactly what it was. She went on to say that HOAs need strong leadership and that people resist rules they don't understand. She said my refusal to comply forced her hand. Not once did she acknowledge the forged documents, the shell companies, the families displaced, the man who died before his home was returned. To her, it was still about control. I folded the letter and put it away. not because it mattered, but because it proved something important. People like Karen don't change, they just lose the ability to act, and that's why accountability matters more than forgiveness. A few weeks later, the final reforms passed, not quietly, publicly. Emergency foreclosure powers were restricted. HOA boundaries had to be recertified yearly. Independent oversight boards were created. And Lien filings now required multiple levels of verification. Karen's name appeared in the legislative record, not as a leader, but as a warning. If you believe consequences should outlive the crime, comment lesson learned. The ranch healed slowly, fences replaced, fields recovered, cattle returned, but healing isn't just physical. Some nights, I still wake up expecting another notice on the door. Another threat. Another letter telling me I don't belong. That kind of damage doesn't disappear overnight. One afternoon, I invited some of the other victims out to the ranch. We sat under the open sky and talked. No lawyers. No reporters. Just people who had almost lost everything. We didn't talk about Karen much. We talked about rebuilding. About trust. About learning when to fight. That mattered more. Before they left, one woman hugged me and said, "You gave us our voice back." I didn't know what to say. Because I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who refused to disappear. And sometimes that's enough. So here's what I want to leave you with. If someone in authority tells you they own you, question it. If rules don't make sense, challenge them. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And if you're ever told to stay quiet for the sake of community, remember this story. Because my family ranch was almost erased by a woman with a clipboard and confidence. And the only reason it was is because I fought. Now I want to hear from you. Backhand index pointing right, would you have opened that letter or burned it? Backhand index pointing right, do you think Karen deserved her sentence? Backhand index pointing right, have you ever faced authority that crossed the line? Tell me in the comments. Your story might help someone else find the courage to speak up. Because silence is what people like Karen depend on. And now, you know exactly what happens when you refuse to give it to them.